Steve actually had the, Antiguan Coast Guard called out, and they stopped the ship and they kicked he and the wife off the ship, and they're banned from the cruise line forever. And none of that was posted directly by him. I'm pretty sure he doesn't want his employer to see that. Works for a big
Of
company,
course.
but it's there. And so where you let me look dictates how much I'm going to find. And then from there, it's not easy. It's not as easy as getting the tech savvy kid that works in the office of the club to look on Facebook.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Private Club Radio, your industry source for news, trends, updates, and conversations all in the world of private clubs and high-end hospitality. And when we say private clubs, we mean country clubs, city clubs, golf clubs, yacht clubs, athletic clubs, military clubs, all the clubs. I'm your host, Denny Corby. Thanks for being here. And back on again today, we have our friend Paul Dank from over at Kennis, member vetting, and we zero in on the pivotal roles that predictive behaviors and member vetting play in the member application process. Paul and I also touch on the complexities of the member removal process, legal nuances for conducting background checks, and some of the potential risks clubs face when they rely on informal sources for their vetting processes. And we're going to learn on the different levels and packages a little bit that Kennis offers when it comes to your member vetting. If you don't know who Kennis is, they are a specialized intelligence gathering division of ASG Investigations, serving private clubs in their member applicant vetting processes. So if you're interested in discovering how fact-based member vetting could protect your club's reputation and integrity, head on over to membervetting.com and set up a consult with our friend Paul Dank. And now, on to the show.
Exclusivity matters to a lot of these clubs. Some are exclusive by virtue of being that top 5% of clubs in terms of price point. But, come on. I mean, the best GMs that I work with say that we help with their culture.
And, oh, damn. Okay. So I was going to say, because that leads right into predictive information, but I want to talk about Diddy.
Yeah, we'll come back to it.
No, so I already hit recording. I was like, oh, it's going to be a perfect segue. But no, we were chatting and I brought up Diddy, and just because it's like a relevant topic now, and what, because I do magic and stuff. So what you're saying about predicting the future? It's not predicting the future. It was predictive information.
Yeah, well, what we do is provide information, and there's two ways that we provide it. Reactively, when something bad has happened and somebody says, can you help us get our arms around the extent of this and who's at fault and, what led to it, right? That's reactive. In terms of the club space, it's proactive, and the whole thing is based on the same tenets that you have a college application for, the same tenets that you would have pre-employment screening for. It's that past actions and facts are indicative of future behavior, and I've said, I think on your show that I'm an optimist. I'm not really an optimist at all, but I say I'm an optimist, and I believe that people can always turn a new leaf, except that they don't. And so we do have those rare moments where somebody actually figures it out and changes. Is that guessing when that's going to happen is probably not in anybody's best interest, whether it's membership in a club or for a job or any other reason that you would vet someone. And associations are really good at this. They have standards for a reason. If somebody isn't meeting the standards, now's the time. Don't let them in. When it comes to the club world, removing somebody is a nightmare. There's usually very detailed process you have to go through, which involves disciplining the person in second try and third try. Each club is different, but that process is a mess. And so when you have somebody who shouldn't have gotten in the first place, wow, what a waste of energy and resources. What a hit to the reputation of the club. All unnecessary if you actually looked at facts and said, we can't just rely on others vouching for people. And there's a really good book out there that talks about prediction. And have you heard of the book by Nissim Taleb called Anti-Fragile?
The name rings a bell.
Okay.
It
Taleb has
might be
written
on.
a number of books. He's incredibly well read. The business community is all over him. I think anybody that's into behavioral analysis knows him and his work. And whether you love him or hate him, Anti-Fragile really points out it's a very long book. It's a little bit of a technical book. It takes some. You can't be reading this in bed before you fall asleep and soak it in. You need to be focused. But in the end, what it says is humans are really, really bad at predicting things. And there are a whole bunch of situations that we skew whether or not they're fragile, right? Meaning the odds of it failing and not working out the way I predict are very high versus things that are very low. Sports betting is very, very fragile. Um, I might think I know all about who's going to win the college football playoff next year, but I don't, and I'm biased toward teams and people, and I have a lack of information. But I tell myself, no way my team's going to win. That's a little bit of an example, but this is no different for wealthy people that are on a member committee on a board at a club deciding someone's fate, whether it's a membership director, whether it's a GM. We're really bad at predicting things. And when we have less information, meaning it's all information controlled by the applicant, maybe a little bit of contribution from other members in the club, they don't have all the information. And now we're doing this feel good prediction that the person's going to work out. And we just chose not to have facts. So it's kind of crazy, but the anti fragile narrative plays out over and over again in this space. That's why if you look at something, and I go back to this because I think it works really well, what it takes to get accepted into a public university, think about that process and all the documentation and all the review that they do and all the money they spend looking over those applications because they actually know what's going to be successful at a university. They have really good predictive measures of whether you're going to make it or not. And yeah, there's always going to be the person that flakes out and you wouldn't expect it to. The kid who has really good grades and really good behavior and then gets to the open light and space of being at a public university, right, and ends up drinking themselves out in the first term. It happens. But more than likely, if you have someone that hasn't been a good student, that hasn't behaved a certain way, they're going to wash out in a much greater proportion than the good students. So universities really have this down. Clubs just haven't embraced the fact that they've said we're kind of void of information. And that information goes a long way. So the predictive value is, I want to believe that you're saying you're gonna be an amazing member, but I'd also like to see some actual reasons that I should believe that you're positioned to do that. And when there are things that we find in that background information and in that OSINT research that show us that they actually behave differently, that's the predictive value right there.
This isn't like, how often do you find weird stuff? I shouldn't say weird stuff. Like, how often, I think you've told me like before, most people are good. Like, most things you find are, it's all good. Everything matches up. It's the few and far between.
Yeah. So a little bit of a complicated question because we do varying degrees of vetting for clubs. So we have some clubs that are very, very stringent and have us go, soup to nuts through everything we can. Others are much more restrictive on the data we look at. What I can tell you is this: the majority of people that apply for membership clubs, there is no derogatory information or contrary information. Then we get into varying shades, right? So you put something on your application, it looks to me like it was a misrepresentation. You tried to look like you were, all that in a bag of chips, and you really weren't even a bag of chips. So, but that's one or two data points. Then you get things like, I see behaviors that you probably wouldn't engage in at the club, certainly when you're trying to get in. But if you feel free to do these things in other environments and you've done them in the recent past, well, gosh, that doesn't bode very well. Maybe I have someone here who's going to be violating the decorum policy before they've even set foot in the door. And then you get into finding the behaviors that are not necessarily criminal, but they're indicative of the fact that I don't follow the rules. I don't do what I'm supposed to do. So some of it, I guess you could frame it as criminal, but it's things like how I drive. It's things like citations. problems with insurance claims, right? Um, and you get into, aside from overt behaviors where someone is demonstrating and saying, so got in big trouble because I jumped off the cruise ship. This is one that we had. I jumped off the cruise ship, and then everybody was super angry, and they had the whatever Antiguan, Coast Guard out there, and they stopped the ship, and I had, okay. I mean, really, you're grown up, you're 30, and you jumped off because it was hilarious. And this isn't somebody who's like Steve-O from the Jackass series. This is somebody who's, sells insurance for a living and wants to join a golf club. If you're going to jump off a cruise ship when you get tuned up, what are you going to do at the club when you get tuned up? Again, maybe your club is okay with that. Maybe your club has different standards, but you look for those behavioral things that say, I'm not going to follow rules. I'm going to do what I want,
and it's not up
you have
to
an opportunity
you.
to see that.
And it's not up to you or Kennis or anybody to decide who's good and who's bad. You're just presenting the information. It's ultimately the club can decide, like, oh, we don't care about that. So this is just the information that I think sometimes clubs look at something like this as it's more in depth, and it's like, well, no, it's not. They're not telling anybody what to do. It's just, hey, we're just finding the juicy information that's just out there. So here's how. With something like that, how difficult is that to find? And I'm trying to think of, like, someone applies for membership at my club. How easy is it to find that, or how difficult? Or, I guess that's another, boiled question there, but I'll let you answer.
Sure. So again, it sort of depends on what the club is engaging me, how deep they're engaging us to look. I've talked previously about the fact that the information is not linear, meaning if you want to find out information about you or me or anyone else, you're going to get some information directly from me. Things like my LinkedIn, I put that up, I control that information, my Facebook. But really, I'll give you the cruise ship jumper example, that was posted by a friend who was on the cruise, and it's not tagged as being that member. So if I were on that person's social media, I would see the hilarious guy jumping off. It doesn't say who it is, but we can identify who he is. The club can identify who he is. It's him. So finding that involved us looking into that sphere, right? So we have to go into buckets where we don't necessarily know there's going to be information, and the information is going to be unstructured. When we find it, then we can present it. Now that, also feeds into the breadcrumbs idea. And that's that we find one and then we go to the next one and the next one and the next one. So opening that up said, okay, this person has a group of people. And by the way, we've got coinciding dates. These are other people that were on the ship. These are other people that also are friends with that person. Let's start quickly looking in those buckets. That's when we find the story of dude, and it's by the first name. We'll call him Steve. Steve actually had the, Antiguan Coast Guard called out, and they stopped the ship, and they kicked he and the wife off the ship, and they're banned from the cruise line forever. And none of that was posted directly by him. I'm pretty sure he doesn't want his employer to see that, right? Works for a big company.
Of course.
But it's there. And so where you let me look dictates how much I'm going to find. And then from there, it's not easy. It's not as easy as getting the tech savvy kid that works in the office of the club to look on Facebook. Certainly do that, because sometimes that's a layup and you find the easy information. But that's what you're paying for a company like mine to do, is to look for any and all facts that aren't easy to find. And that takes the right training, the right equipment, access. And the craziest thing is how busy our R&D department is, because things are rolling out at a continuous basis. Things like data breach data, once it becomes public and it's out there, it's full of intimate details about things. But even these breaches that happened 4 or 5 years ago, we find all kinds of information from the data breach data, which doesn't live anywhere. But if you have it, and you have it on a server, and you download it every time data breach information is published, well, then you've got a whole new repository of stuff that people tapping away Google are never going to find. But it's public and it's laying around waiting to have. So in terms of home gamers thinking about doing what we do and being successful, limited opportunity.
Can you briefly go into so something like finding Mr. Jumper here? What level package about is that information getting? Is that more of is that higher end? Is that more the middle?
No, that was not
something like
that was real close to the middle. Yeah, maybe a bit
okay.
above the middle. I think in total, we offer 9 packages really, with number 9 being the nuclear verdict, and number 1 being a lot of public record data just done correctly. What I mean by that is, if you think about pre-employment screening and the $29.95 super background search that you see advertised all over the web, right? You want to do a background check on your neighbor, so you go to whatever Zippy search and it's $19.95. Those are data brokers sell information. What they also sell you is a disclaimer. So there's several asterisks that say, based on where we looked, which was under my iPhone, based on where we looked, these are the records that we found. And so they limit what they're looking at, and they buy data that's already available. And it's always incomplete. It's grossly incomplete. They come up with things like a national background check. There is no national background check. Our records are firewalled off. They're very difficult to find. If you're using someone with a common name, it's a nightmare. You have to have skills, processes, tools to do that stuff. And so when we offer a low-end package, we do the public record thing correctly. We figure out all the places where records could exist, and we search all of them. We don't use a data broker who says, this is what I've got, and no, it's not complete, and it'll never be complete. They're trying to be a little more artful with their disclaimers than what I was saying, but that's the reality. Is there isn't a place to go. The CSI shows and the cool person with the cool haircut on the keyboard who finds everything in 5 seconds. Oh, look at this. That's a fantasy. And the record system in this country is becoming more walled off than ever before. So you can get the records, but you have to pay to get them. You have to search a certain way. You have to pay whether or not you get a response or not. These municipalities have figured out this is a money-making adventure now. And so freedom has a price. And you have to know who would have jurisdiction. We have issues all the time. We have a club that's in Memphis, and it was a struggle with them to say, well, you want us to pay a little bit more, and I said, I know, because you sit on the border of Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee. So people have records, and the Arkansas records are not available in Tennessee. No matter how hard I look, I can't find them. They're walled off. And if you don't want me to look in those places, don't complain when you talk about, you and I have talked about how members will spend all this time doing homework and research on each other and come up with the dirt. Well, they don't have that restriction, so don't restrict me. So you really have to be complete with it. But within that package, the jumper was probably very near the middle, maybe a little above the middle. We look at the sphere, and we do that literally like an onion, one layer at a time. Do you want this additional layer of searching? The bad news with the additional layer is you're spending a little bit of money, and a lot of what I'm finding when I go to that next level is stuff I've already found. That's okay. I'm going to find unique stuff, but each time we move a little bit further out, it's probably the law of diminishing returns. So our pricing of our packages sort of also decreases, even though we've got a lot of information that we have to find a second time or a third time or a fourth time. It's just the nature of the beast. In terms of the information, we present it, and then we present it in a format where things that we think are, and the term is responsive, things that we think would actually make someone pause or that they would want to evaluate, we try and put those toward the front of the report. And so if there are things that we find that we know you're going to want to know, what is their court record history, for instance, right? If they are posting things that are inflammatory directly, obviously those are going to go near the top. And we keep going and presenting it in an order. Because of the volume of what we find, most of our report is comprised of links. And those are links to data that we found. So it's definitely a data point about Denny Corby, but it really isn't going to make any difference. It's yet another address history in yet another database that's on the web, right? So it's something that we found. It's your it's the fact that you had a MySpace and there's a directory that said that you had a MySpace years ago. And that kind of information usually isn't contributory toward making a decision. But again, we disclose everything that we find and we don't evaluate it, we just present it. And, you know, there are things that you can say in Texas that you probably can't socially say in Northern California. We're just a diverse country, and the behaviors and norms in one place are insults in another. And so I have to leave it up to the clubs to sort of say, you know, what matters to us. And remember, we're not just about yes or no. It's not just red or green. Sometimes there's a conversation to be had. So we'll provide data, and someone will say, well, this is an unfortunate thing, but it was 5 years ago. It's not the best, but I'm going to bring it up to the member, and I'm going to remind them that at the club, something like that would really be frowned upon. And to make sure that you're clear that you're joining a club where the behaviors are different than those, and you set the tone. How about you have that conversation, and then they defend themselves and say, no, I'm going to act however I want. Oh, cool. Now I just figured out you're unfit for membership. You know, and it gives the clubs opportunities to work with that data in different ways to help them with the decision-making process. It's not always a layup. The guy that jumps off the ship, I'm betting there's some clubs that would say, if he jumps off the cabana roof into the pool a couple times, you know, with the Jägermeister bottle, it's okay. And other clubs, it would be, this is not the right time. I think that that's a big part of it. What's going on in your life, and is this the right time? I had a club who came back and called me and said, you found that the police were at their house 4 times in the last year. I did. Yes, that's correct. That's the data. 4 times the police were called to the house. I don't have more than that. That department doesn't tell me the nature of the runs, but what's going on in the house? The police are coming 4 times. How often have the police been to your house, Danny? You know, probably a lot in your case. But, regular folk usually don't need the police a lot. And doesn't 4 times stand out? So what's going on? So when you add 4 times to some other behaviors that say, maybe I'm not a perfect fit, it makes it a lot easier. But I think that's the whole point of being exclusive, right? That's the whole point of, you have to exclude sometimes, and you have to set a baseline. And I think there's probably even situations where now is not the right time for you to join our club. And we're being a little bit choosy, and you have more defects than most of our normal members. So why am I rolling the dice on you right now? You know, and maybe we'll see in a couple of years if it changes, or you know, and that's a decision that they're going to have to make. But I think you have people think about it this way: would you invest money with someone that was showing signs that they don't follow the rules? And also, you found out, I told you, from an investment due diligence standpoint, they had the police at their house 4 times. No, they don't have a criminal record from this year. They were not taken away in handcuffs. Would that make you feel super good about handing them $3 million to start a new venture?
Probably not.
At a minimum, there'd be a conversation, right? And you'd hope that there'd be a really quick answer. And you know what? You can always call me back and say, this is the answer they gave me. Can you help me verify that? That's always a possibility. Clubs can always call and say, here's the additional information we obtained about that. Can you provide the insight? Sometimes I can't. Sometimes there isn't more to get, but a lot of times there is once I know something else.
So wait, and I was saying this earlier. I feel like now is the time for clubs to try so many new things and like push the barrier a little bit, or even like now is the time to, if they might want to do a little bit more of like an investigative, backgroundy fact checking on their members. Like now's the time. There's hasn't been a better, you know, demand is so much higher than supply for clubs and membership and the wait list. Like now is the time more than ever to be pickier with your members, because you can. Because if you don't like someone, it's not like you don't have a wait list. Now you have so many people waiting to come in. Just wait. So why not? Like this is the time now to do it.
Well, listen, I agree with you, and the industry is doing great, and it's fantastic. And the number of clubs we contact with wait lists is almost 100%. I'm sure the number of clubs that contact us, it's almost 100% have wait lists, and some have wait lists in absolutely every category. Some have maybe one or two categories that are open. But remember, despite it being a good time to be choosy, a big part of using Kennis is because you don't want to put yourself in a position where, as a club, you just decided not to look for the bad information, and then the bad event happens. And board members love to say, "Well, we've never had a mass shooting at our club, so we're going to assume that that's just not the kind of thing that happens here at whatever Hearst. We don't do things. It would be in poor taste to have a mass shooting, and none of our members would do that." Okay, well, it's not always just about a mass shooting. I can't tell you how many lawsuits are filed against clubs because of behavior of a member. And look at anybody that you want to. Look at a celebrity that has broken. Look at a media. Look at somebody who's been involved in a mass shooting. What's the first thing the media does? They do exactly what we do. They do their version of it, but they dig into the past and they try and say, look at all the predictive things that were leading up to this. Every time our government, the people that are trying to protect us, have an incident and the incident goes through, somebody in the media will say, look at all the predictive things, and the government failed to catch this person. They knew this person was a problem, right? This person was going to blow up a building, or this person was going to shoot somebody, and you could see that it was coming. That's exactly what we're talking about. So over and above refining and honing the culture of your club by letting in people that truly are going to fit in the club, forget about that. It's the reasonableness of saying, we just choose not to look. We're just going to go with recommendations because we always have. Clearly, the world has changed. If you look around, there is no organized, structured anything from employment to volunteering that doesn't have some level of fact-based vetting going on in it. Clubs are just behind, and they're uniquely positioned for a fraction of the initiation fee to meet that and keep the wolves at bay. A lot of the time, you're going to find predictive stuff, and those are the people that end up breaking. And I know you and I have talked about this. Your strata in society has nothing to do with your odds of having a mental health condition. And in no way am I picking on people that have a mental health condition, but when people that have a mental health condition hurt somebody just still got hurt. If there were predictive values and the cause really doesn't matter, does it? If it was somewhat predictable to say this person really isn't suited for membership. So at a minimum, you've got to do it in hopes of getting that. Let's say it's 1 in 10. Let's say it's 1 in 15 members that are hard no. We send something back and it's a hard no, not fit for membership. That alone is the value. And if it's bad enough, if somebody actually gets hurt at the hands of a member, what is the price associated with that? That would be 50 years of Kennis fees, 100 years of Kennis fees versus one situation where a staff member got hurt, a guest got hurt, another member got hurt. Come on, it's a no-brainer. But the rest of society has looked at this and said, we're 100% adapting it because it works. The predicted value holds true. And what I said about anti-fragile, it's true. We are terrible at predicting. We're just awful at it. And everybody likes to say they're a good judge of character. There is no such thing. There is no such thing. That's just arrogance. And listen, I used to do it too until I started seeing, my judgment combined with facts was a lot better than my judgment. And I'm really smart. Just ask me.
How smart are you, Paul?
I'm uber smart. It's kind of scary. Plus, the coolest reason to work with Kennis is to tell people we have a guy in Detroit that takes care of these things. Who doesn't want to say that? We need to call the guy from Detroit. As I'm wearing my Yankees
hat. So there's a phrase that I heard, and then you have your way of saying it, and it's actually come up more. It's more common than I thought would be, and it's my members are better investigators.
Yes. So we like to talk about books, you and I.
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yep.
10,000 hours, right? So there are people who will invest 10,000 hours in digging and snooping. It's a variant of what we do. You got to put the time in. Um, it's not the same because you're usually stuck with Google to do your digging, but you can do the same thing. Somebody can spend endless amounts of time saying, who is Denny? Who's Denny's sphere? Now, let me start looking into those people. Let me connect the dots manually on my own. And a lot of times they confine it to social media, but sometimes they'll get the public records and things like that. Your members also have the benefit of gossip. So, in a lot of tight communities, and this doesn't apply to all clubs because you can't say that you're in metropolitan Los Angeles or Atlanta and it's a tight knit community. It's not a tight knit community. There's people moving in and out all the time. There's people from all over the place. The world is becoming much more transient. People move around for work opportunities, marriage, whatever. But when you do get a tight knit community with a club in it, there's a lot of information and there is a lot of gossip. This is interesting to me because you will have clubs who will take action on someone's application based on gossip said by other members. In a way, it kind of works, but it's also kind of broken. It works because if the members that are telling you this stuff are concerned about it and they're already good members, well, then that's a pretty good indicator the person's probably not going to work out, right? But you're willing to toss their application over those conversations, which could be contrived and maybe aren't
Biased.
based on a lot of facts or valid information. But clubs will act on that. So the good news is it gives you an opportunity to keep people out that aren't going to be a good fit or have potentially exposure and liability. So you're doing the ultimate correct thing, you think, but you're doing it without fact. You're doing it based on somebody's subjective interpretation of things. So unless they can say this, I had a club who called me and said, there's someone who said that this person's teen son was sexually aggressive with another community member's daughter, and that this is something that they're thinking about calling the police on. And I said, yeah, I don't know, I can't find a fact. So if that's true, that's terrible. And if it's true, it's not in a searchable fashion, and it sounds like something that somebody said. So is it true? And this is all third party, right? This is a third party who heard it from somebody else who knows the mom of the girl. And I said, no, we'll look, but there's nothing floating around in public domain that points to that, let alone an official that says it actually happened and somebody was convicted. So, long answer. So,
No. Because it was just fascinating that when it just came up in conversation, because for me, when chatting with people, things come up, and so it was talking about the vetting, because I was asking, they had a big wait list, all this, and multiple times, so do you guys have like a vetting process or anything? And our members are pretty good at that. All right, then.
yeah, I'll give you an interesting story. I actually told this a couple times before to prospective clubs. The Detroit Lions, who are doing much better, but in the past, the Detroit Lions had a coach who came in, and this is an employment situation, so it's governed by different rules than the private club standard. But they had a coach, well known. Matt Patricia came over from the Patriots, took over as head coach. He was here, I think, for a year and a half when a reporter from the Detroit Free Press called the GM of the Lions and just said, did you know Matt Patricia was arrested for sexual assault down in Texas when he was in college? And was just stymied, right? And so instead of saying what he should have, which is, I'm aware of it, number one. Number two, he was not convicted. And number three, from an employment perspective, I can't even consider that. He was not convicted of anything. And it happened a long time ago. And I'm aware of it. The problem was the Lions were not aware of it. So they brought him over. It sounds like they didn't vet him at all because he was already in the NFL. He was already known, right? Everybody recognized his face. Everybody knew who he was. So they brought him in without vetting him. And here's the difference. It's the same thing that you're talking about, where you have these members that will invest all kinds of energy in digging up dirt. Who's the last to know? In this case, the Lions management, but the club's management is. Tennis affords clubs and companies like mine afford a club an opportunity to avoid that from happening. Isn't it much better to say, hey, a member approached me and I was able to tell them we're aware of that and that was not a factor that was critical in the decision making process. So yes, we're aware of it and yes, they're a member. Or better yet, you take care of it and you never have to be on the flip side of that coin, which is, oh, we didn't know, and that's really bad because we never would have let them in. It just, it doesn't make sense to go without saying we did the due diligence, because whatever my team is going to do, we're going to run laps around that member no matter how much time they put into it. If you're giving us a package that allows us to do the complete search, there's no way around it.
Do you ever find things that make the person better? Like people who like underplay their stuff?
100%.
So it's like people like, oh, this and this, but you find out it's like, oh, they donated $1 billion to this. Oh, they did that. Like, oh, I didn't realize they're responsible for this. Do you ever get clubs that are surprised by how much better members are or people are that are applying?
Absolutely. So two things. We usually don't get feedback on members, good or bad.
Right.
Sometimes I'll ask
True.
a question if it's borderline bad, or they might say, "Hey, is there anything else with this account?" Or there was a person on Twitter who was attacking a prospective member a lot. I'm sorry, X, and they said, "Can you give us any context on that person? We'll give you a couple bucks to figure out. Tell me that person." And it turns out that's what that person does, is just attacks people. And we did find a nexus in their backgrounds. I think they worked together at one point. So I don't know. I don't think it was very credible. Not for me to decide, but the idea is, you know what? I'm sorry, Danny, I'm losing my train of thought here.
Finding good people, and then you don't really, and then it was one of those,
Yeah,
as I was saying the question, I figured nobody, clubs aren't going to come back like, yo, this person's so much better than we thought. But
well, yeah, you're absolutely right. It does happen where it's the exact opposite, and they say we really didn't realize, how good of a patron of the community this person is. They're very humble, they're very quiet, and it turns out they do an awful lot, and we've got a real treasure. And so yes, absolutely.
I don't know, because we were talking about like bad stuff. I was like, I wonder if you just find all this amazing information and clubs are like, wow, he's too good
Yeah,
for here. Our membership, our members are going to eat him alive. Sir, you don't want to be here.
I think the focus is clearly on making sure that there aren't bad things, as opposed to confirming all the good things or finding even more good things. But yeah, listen, there's far more good people that are true with their intention who join clubs than there are knuckleheads.
What should clubs do? So going back, the membership is, the members are chatting in the hallway, and it gets back to the people in charge of the membership committees, or whoever's the last say. What happens when you hear a rumor?
Well, you're asking the wrong guy. Here's what I know. Clubs have been dealing with this for the last 150 plus years. And I think, based on conversations with a number of people, that the informal subjective decisions get made pretty easily. That when there's a blackmail situation, whatever you want to call it, clubs are happy to say no if they have some information and it's information that didn't come from a guy like me. That's where we fit in, is trying to fill that void of facts. And it's pretty rare that we get called to say, can you confirm anything, like we did the situation with the two teenagers. It's pretty rare that we get that call, but we do get that call, where they'll say, this is something we were told and we'd like to look a little bit further. Other times they'll say, hey, without some proof of it, we don't have a choice but to ignore it. I think that just gets down to the culture of your club and how selective they are.
Gotcha.
I think it happens all the time. The other thing that clubs seem to do is they will call a prior club that you or I, as an applicant, were a member at, and they will have informal discussions. And if that discussion is, hey, you don't want Paul in your club, he's a problem, you will blackball that person based off of that conversation. And I would say that that's actually actionable. When there's somebody, I was a member of a club, and someone is speaking about me and characterizing me directly, and they're speaking on my behalf about that relationship, and I'm getting blackballed, and you're not telling me why, I think that there's a great deal of exposure. There's a way for clubs to do that correctly, but having a quick, what can you tell me about Danny? Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I'm not gonna let him in. I don't think that's a very good idea. Now, there are club members, GMs that know each other very well, and I think that that has happened. But I think it's an area of risk. And if people know that you made that phone call and things get hot enough, I could see that coming up. I could see people focusing on that. So I would say that that is definitely not a best practice.
What about when members do it? What about when members see, oh, they're a member of that club? Oh, Phyllis is a member of that club. Let me talk to Phyllis. What about when it's that chain of command?
I
Is
think, especially if it's negative, they'll come back and report, oh, this person has, had their golfing privileges taken away and their membership suspended multiple times. And yeah, it's no different than saying the person is bad in the community for the following reasons, or they're up to shady things, or the members are going to report those things. And I think clubs, like I said, have been dealing with it for a very long time, so they already have a process for dealing with that. And again, some of the time we're asked, hey, can you come in and find anything to substantiate this claim? Because it's not great. But a lot of times, yeah, I think they've already been dealing with that. And that happens in a lot of different circles. I mean, look at Greek life on campus. You know, people will people would be pretty quick to say this person hangs out with uncool people, or this person doesn't fit with us, and here's why. I don't like them. And, they wore the wrong sweater, and I don't think professionally run private clubs are like that, but I do think that they act on information that comes that's subjective and indirect. So that's not going to change whether you're using chemistry.
Thank you so much, Paul. Always love learning and chatting with you. If you're interested in stepping up your member vetting, head on over to membervetting.com, set up a consult with Paul Dank, and ensure your club's safety and security. Hope you all enjoyed that episode. If you did, like, share, subscribe with someone who you think can use the information. As always, any and all support and sharing of the content in the channel means the absolute world and costs nothing. Until next time, catch you on the flippity flip.